Hey, everybody, this is the Progress Report, and this is the first Wednesday in July. Hope everybody had a wonderful celebration of the nation's birthday over the weekend, despite the rain, which we badly needed. But because it's the first Wednesday, it means I have the great pleasure of being joined again by my good friend and longtime dedicated servant to the citizens of New Hampshire in many capacities, recently for many, many terms as a New Hampshire state senator representing a good chunk of Manchester and my hometown of Goffstown. And Lou, it's great to have you back with me.
No, thank you, Bob. It's always a pleasure.
I did not get to post the show tonight because I was Lou and I were trying to line up a certain guest to join us. Turns out a lot of people are out of town tonight. I hope a lot of people are in town and watching the show here in Manchester, Hooks, or Auburn, or on your computer, wherever you may be. Because we decided we would go right ahead because there are certainly some important things happening in the state, in the city, in the country that we would like to get to. So with that, I think we're going to kind of launch into things. I might just start off, Lou. You and I were just talking before we came on the fact that I've been away for, a couple of weeks, and that is because I was literally on the midnight train to Georgia. Actually, the midnight train to Georgia,
Wow.
which arrives in the town in Georgia, a little town called Toccoa, northeast Georgia. It arrives just after about 6:30 in the morning. And the reason I was there is because my dear wife grew up in a small town about 40 minutes away from Toccoa called Helen, Georgia. Once a lumbering town, now a reconceived idea of a Bavarian alpine resort with, the half-timbered buildings, the Oompa bands, the Lederhosen, lots of beer. And the big activity is rafting down the Chattahoochee River, the upper Chattahoochee, the river that goes through Atlanta, on inner tubes. So it's called Alpine Helen. So that's where we were. And before we got there, I had had a wonderful chance to visit with my daughter in the Washington area. She lives in Northern Virginia. One of the things I did was to go to visit the home of George Washington, our first president, which I had not visited since I was a teenager. So I didn't remember much about that, and I went there. And I have some things I want to say about that, but Lou, before I get to that, I want to ask you. You've had so much experience here. You started your political career as a Republican, which somehow didn't work as far as the Union League is concerned because they called you Liberal Lou even when you were a Republican. And then you became a Democrat and became a long-term, very successful member of the New Hampshire Senate, the dean of the Senate. And I just wanted to ask you, Lou, with all you've seen over the years, and take it both on the national level and the state level,
Right.
the partisan warfare between the parties, it seems to me it's about as bad as I can ever remember. Does it seem that way to you? I think you probably will agree it is at the national level. Are you seeing it also infect the politics at the state level?
Well, I think you're exactly on target when you say the national level, and it's gravitated down to the local level. I think this last session was the most partisan session of the legislature that I have ever been a party to. And remember, I was elected to the legislature in 1972, so I've been around for a while.
A long time.
And I would say the most partisan I have ever been a part of, both on the Senate and on the House side. Every major bill, let's talk about the major ones, 1 and 2, there was no Democratic signature. They were signed by
You're talking about the budget bill and the trailer bill, which have now become law.
Right, the budget bill and the trailer bill.
Yeah, without a single Democratic vote in either house.
Right, without a single Democratic vote. Now, the exception to that was the capital budget. I served on the capital budget with David Waters, and the capital budget went through in a bipartisan fashion. And I think turned out to be a very good document, and that one that's going to be very serviceable for the people of the state of New Hampshire. But when it came to the basics, and that's the operating budget of the state of New Hampshire, it was a partisan issue. And I've worked with the Senate president for a long time. I think he's a very responsible, reasonable guy, and we worked together on a couple of issues. But when the final push came, it was not possible to vote for the budget. Just wasn't possible. And I brought House Bill 2 along so that people
Oh,
could
my goodness, look at
just
that.
get a look at it. But House Bill 2 is the most voluminous document that's really ever been produced. It's the largest House Bill 2 that's ever been produced. Almost 200 sections to House Bill 2. A lot of policy in House Bill 2 that people are going to be adhering to, paying attention to, and being governed by for the next 2 years and possibly beyond that. When you look at what was done with taxes in New Hampshire, those decreases are going to be with us for a long period of time. They're not going to have an effect this biennium because we've got so much money we don't know what to do with it. We've got COVID-19 money. I think we've got 25 or 30 million left there to spend. We got $1 billion coming in under the American Recovery Act. The city of Manchester's got 43.7 million coming in. Every municipality in the state has some money under the Recovery Act. So there's a lot of money to perk up the economy, and I think the economy has been perked up. The danger is inflation.
Exactly.
And we have to be very cognizant of inflation. I see it at the grocery store. When shopping with my wife, actually yesterday, went to the
And at the
market,
gas pump, you're going to see it too.
the gas pump for sure. Well, the gas pump, it's $3, sometimes $3 plus gasoline. So it's a problem.
Okay.
And,
Oh, we got a call. Great.
right.
Hey, hello, caller. Welcome to the Progress Report. We're glad you're with us. Have you got a question or comment for me or for Lou?
For both of you, just a quick experience that what I just had.
Sure.
I'm a Manchester resident, live at the end of Montgomery Street, off of Goffstown Road.
Oh, we're almost neighbors.
I recently, about a month ago, requested that they come down and clean out the cul-de-sac that I live on. All our neighbors are trying to be very conscientious about how our neighborhood looks.
Sure.
And we asked the people to come, the highway department to come down. About 2 weeks later, after we called 3 or 4 times, they came down with a big mulcher thing, or not a mulcher, it looked like a big blade in a circle, and they took down all the shrubs on one or two passes, and the guy drove away. He never picked up any of the anything that fell, anything he chopped down with that machine, and they never really came back to clean it as we were hoping they were going to do before we went in there and quote unquote kind of beautified it a little bit. So we're really trying to get our neighborhood take a little pride in it, and it just seems like it's a squeaky wheel that gets the grease, sometimes doesn't get the grease when it comes to the highway department, I think it was, or whoever I contacted, Public Works.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say the gentleman's name, of course, out of respect. I'm sure he's a good guy, but boy, I tell you, just reaching out to try to get something done on city land has been a bit of a hassle. We're not really getting too moving forward on this, so I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Okay. Well, my thought is, have you called your alderman about this?
Right.
No.
Very important. Your alderman is your direct representative in city government, and most aldermen are very responsive. I know on my side of the river, I'm in Ward 10. And
So I would be in Ward 12.
You're in Ward 12. Your alderman is Keith Hirschman.
Keith who?
Keith Hirschman.
Hirschman.
If you go to the city's website, every alderman is listed with the home phone number, so you can easily get in touch with them, and he should be your advocate on this. He's the guy that should intervene with the Public Works people and say, you made an effort, but you didn't finish the job.
I was just hoping it was going to be more of maybe not a one and done, but a 2 phone call, 2 week, a month period. But now we're dragging into 2 months.
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
The initial chop down some debris happened about a month ago, and just trying to get something done with it.
Sure.
That's all. Just kind of take a little pride in Manch.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, yes, if you're interested in maintaining your property and the appearance of it, that's all to the good for you and for everybody, really.
Right.
So.
Good for the neighborhood.
It's not my property. It's the cul-de-sac in the middle of
Oh, I see.
the
Yeah.
turn. And so it's public. It's city land.
I see.
It's probably maybe, I'd say, 50 yards, maybe be 40 yards by like 30 yards, not a very large piece of property.
Yeah,
But boy, it sticks right out, and you
Uh-huh.
want to kind of just spruce it up a little bit.
sure.
But
Sure.
it just, I don't think it should have to be, in an ideal world, that should have just been down there, cleaned up, boom.
Yeah,
Right.
And we can move in there and kind of do some stuff to it, but I don't
well,
know.
just more proof we don't live in an ideal world, do we?
No,
but-
I guess we went in there with blinders on, thinking we're going to get some progress on this.
Well, I think.
Okay, well, thanks for taking my call.
Oh, you're
Like to
very,
hear
Thanks
well.
for calling.
Thank you. Thank
more
you.
Suggestions.
Yep.
Okay, take care and
Yep.
have a great American Day. Thank you, buddy. Look at one thing about New Hampshire. We have 400 members of the House of Representatives. That's direct democracy.
Yes, it is.
Direct democracy.
Yeah.
In the city of Manchester, we have 14 aldermen, 12, one from each ward and 2 at large.
Right.
We have 14 school committee members, 1 from each ward and 2 at large. I don't know how much more direct you can get
Yeah.
in terms of the democratic
yeah.
process. And as you mentioned, everybody's phone numbers are listed. I know people answer the phone because I make the calls every once in a while, and I know they call me. I get
sure they
get
do.
my calls, and I think that's what we take a great deal of pride in New
And,
Hampshire.
and I think most people that seek out these offices, they want to be of help to
Yeah.
their constituents.
Oh, I think so.
They want to provide constituent service. So
Sure.
you shouldn't hesitate to call your alderman or your school committee person,
Right.
whatever it is, or your state rep if it's an issue with a state
Sure.
bureaucracy,
And
or office.
Right. Being involved is the most important thing. Listen, democracy fades if people don't participate.
Yeah.
The greatest factor in a working democracy is participation. And I'm on a committee that's doing a strategic plan for the Council of State Governments. And I said the bottom line in a strategic plan is do what you do better and communicate. And if you do those 2 things, you're going to have great success. You're going to meet with great
Right.
success. But communication is a key. Communication,
certainly is.
Communication saves the nation.
Yeah.
And we've got to do more of that. And coming out of this pandemic, I think communication is so vital. I spent most of my day today with the superintendent of New Hampshire Hospital and just communicating about mental health, about the problems with mental health, both for adults and for children, and how we, the people, have got to get involved. We can't let huge lapses occur. We just can't let that happen. If we appropriate money, that money should be spent where it was appropriated.
Yeah.
And indeed, if you don't do that, if that is not done, then government isn't working.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's got to work,
Yeah.
and we've got to communicate.
So I was going to go back to a more broad scale subject. I mentioned my, taking the midnight train to Georgia.
Right.
Well, halfway down in Washington, D.C., we got out at the Union Station, which I think is the most magnificent public building in the whole city.
It's beautiful.
Of magnificent buildings, but it is just a stunning,
Yeah, it is.
stunning piece of architecture, that Union Station, looking right up at the Capitol when you come out the front door. It's just magnificent. But one of the reasons I stopped there is my daughter lives in Northern Virginia, not very far away, part of the metro area. And she provided us with a tour to Mount Vernon, the home of our first president,
Yes.
George Washington, for whom the city is named. We have a town in New Hampshire named for him. I believe it was the first place in all the nation to be named for Washington, was Washington, New Hampshire, way up in the very tiny end of the northwest Hillsborough County. And we have a state named for George. Everything's named for George. We have the highest mountain
Right,
in
Mount
the,
Washington.
in 1,000 miles in every direction. The highest peak is Mount Washington.
Right.
And Washington set some great examples for this country, in addition to being, as was said of him, first in war, first in peace, first in the hearts of his countrymen. First, and I really like to point this out, and they were really anxious to point this out at Mount Vernon, he was the only founding father that arranged as best he could for the freedom of his slaves. And unfortunately, most of his slaves were not his, but Martha, because Martha was the wealthiest woman in the colonies. He married up on that score.
Right.
And that enabled him to do things like serve the entire Revolutionary War without ever taking a salary, though he did take expenses. But he came to believe that slavery was not a good idea, and upon his death, he freed some slaves that were his, and then he tried to arrange for the manumission, which is the fancy word for freeing your slaves, upon Martha's death. Now, Martha never really got into this idea that that slavery was as wrong as Washington came to believe it was. And it's been a wonderful thing that our foundingest of all the founding fathers had this. But the other thing he did, of course, after serving in the Revolutionary War as the general of the Continental Army and beating the greatest military force the world had ever seen, and through a long war of attrition, he served the first and second terms as President of the United States. He was, in fact, the only president never to live in the White House. Even John Adams lived in a partially completed White House for part of his term, but Washington never lived in the White House. And when he stepped down, he wrote a famous farewell address. This farewell address used to be recited to all the school children in all the public schools in the United States. That, I think, perhaps unfortunately has gone by and by. But, you know, when I was talking to Lou about earlier, about the problem, the partisanship that's seeping into our city and into our state, and Lou said it's the worst he's ever seen since he's been elected to the Senate in 1972, a long time. And here's what I want to say about Washington. I want to quote just a little bit from his famous farewell address, which some people believe was ghost-written by Alexander Hamilton. I don't know, but Washington delivered this address, not in a speech to Congress, but in a written statement to Congress. And he had 2 points he wanted to make. One was that we should stay out of entangling foreign alliances, given the wars raging in Europe as he left office between the French and the English, and the Napoleonic Wars were starting, and the French Revolution and all that. But the other thing he talked about was he called faction. Today, if we were doing this speech, he would use the word partisanship, not faction. But this is what he had to say, and I just think we need to remember this. I have already intimated to you the danger of parties in the state, with particular reference to the founding of them on geographical discriminations. Let me now take a more comprehensive view and warn you in the most solemn manner against the baneful effects of the spirit of party generally. This spirit, unfortunately, is inseparable from our nature, having its root in the strongest passions of the human mind. It exists under different shapes in all governments, more or less stilled, stifled, controlled, or repressed. But in those of the popular front, it is seen in its greatest rankness and is truly their worst enemy. The alternate domination of one faction over another, sharpened by the spirit of revenge, natural to party dissension, which in different ages and countries has perpetrated the most horrid enormities, is itself a frightful despotism. But this leads at length to a more formal and permanent despotism. The disorders and miseries which result gradually incline the minds of men to seek security and repose in the absolute power of an individual. And sooner or later, the chief of some prevailing faction, more able or more fortunate than his competitors, turns this disposition to the purposes of his own elevation on the ruins of public liberty.
Wow.
Pretty prophetic, wasn't it?
Yes, yes.
He foresaw it. He
Right.
foresaw what we're in danger of becoming in this country right now.
Yes.
So I say, all hail George Washington, who provided over what I would argue, and others have said, is the only successful revolution in all human history that didn't degenerate into despotism and terror.
Wow.
And I think you can say it didn't because of one man with many excellent helpers, but the one man was George Washington, the father of our country. So that's my little history lesson for today, and recalling the greatness of
Right.
some of our most inspiring days, the days of the Revolution,
Well,
the founding of the government, the Constitution, and the presidential leadership of a brand new nation
sure.
by George Washington.
And what better time to recall this?
It's a good thing to
Right.
recall.
It's a good thing.
It's
Here
a
we
good thing
are.
to recall.
Right. We just celebrated the 4th of July with all the
Yep.
pomp and circumstance that goes with the 4th of July.
We did indeed.
You know, it's become a fireworks display, but indeed, the parades that we had in the old days, and I'm going back now to my youth, when we always had a glorious parade,
Always.
and people were lining up on the sidewalk. My uncle would take me to the parades. I'd sit on the curbstone and watch the troops pass by, and it was an exhilarating feeling.
Yeah.
And it was you were so proud to be an American. And I've said this on many occasions, Bob. I think I've lived in the best of times. The best of times. We came out of the Second World War. and the country really, really blossomed. We had the GI Bill of Rights, which allowed for
What
people.
a significant piece of
Oh,
legislation
one,
that was.
one of the most
And it was a
significant.
great thing for achieving a degree of equality that we have
Exactly.
not had since.
Right. It has not. It
We
has
have
not
now
happened
great
again.
inequality in our country, very
Right.
dangerous, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah, absolutely.
With so much of the economic benefits flowing to the top 0.1% or 1%, or at most 10%.
Sure,
And the GI Bill of Rights, you know, gave people an opportunity.
Right.
These were, and then we had a citizen army in World War II.
Yes.
We no longer have a citizen army.
right.
We have a professional army.
Right, which
And I
is
guess we're
something
not
that-
going back to a citizen army,
No.
but that's the army that fought and won in World War II.
Yes.
And they were properly rewarded with things like the GI Bill, and you know, which gave them. I went to Wesleyan University, you know, back in the '60s, and I loved it down there. It was a great school, I thought, and still think so. And I can remember asking my professors, you know, some of them were still there when the GIs were coming through. I said,
Yes, sure.
What was the best students you ever had? It was those GIs.
Oh, they
He
were
said
workers.
they were so grateful for the
Right.
opportunity to learn. They weren't just into partying. They really wanted to get an education. They
Right.
wanted to go and have families and be successful.
Right.
It was a tremendous program.
I think it was, as we said, one of the most significant pieces of legislation ever passed
Yeah.
in this country.
Yeah.
And it not only gave you educational opportunities, but it provided for home ownership.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
it allowed for the melding of the society. And, you know, the society wasn't perfect. Remember?
Well, you know, the blacks did not participate.
The blacks did
in
not
this-
participate
in this
right.
very much, but
Right.
yeah.
Well, we had segregation in the armed forces,
Yeah.
and you know that has broken down obviously over the years. But we had segregation. Listen, we had the internment of the Japanese Americans,
Yeah.
which was
Yeah,
terrible.
Terrible disgrace.
Terrible disgrace
Yeah.
that we're living with the ramifications of that even to this day.
Yeah.
Look at what's happening in this country where they're beating up on Asians.
Yeah.
I mean, that's unbelievable.
Yeah, it certainly is.
Yeah, you see an elderly woman in New York City who gets attacked by an individual.
And this is the one where the doorman just closed the
Yeah.
door and wouldn't go to her aid.
Right,
and a
that's
fancy
awful.
Piece
That's
of
awful.
high-rise housing
You
or
know,
hotel or something.
you know, I've in my lifetime I've been very fortunate, very, very, very lucky. You know, I tell the story, and I'm going to bend your ear for a moment and tell you how important I think helping others is, and then I equate this with just being kind and being a good individual. I was a youngster, and my father took me into a shoe store, and in those days you had one pair of shoes, you know, and you went to that shoe store, and they had that little machine which they, you know,
I remember that.
put your feet in and looked at it.
Yep.
And a very pregnant woman came into the shoe store with a youngster, and her lace was untied. And you know how dangerous it can be when you have a lace that's untied, it flips over. My dad got down on his knees and tied that woman's shoe. Now, that was one of the most significant acts of kindness that I had ever seen. And
Makes a big impression on
yeah,
you as
it
a
made an
son
impression
looking
on
up
me,
to your
right,
father.
Right, made a tremendous impression on me. And then I'm in the office of the superintendent at the New Hampshire Hospital, and there's a little framed picture on her wall, and it says, "Be kind."
Yeah.
What,
Yeah.
you know, what better indication of sharing and being communicative and being responsive than to be kind?
Yeah.
It doesn't take a lot to
That's
do that.
really what it's all about. You know, well,
we're in
central to every religion,
so-
not just Christianity, is the golden rule.
Yeah, it's
Do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
central to the basis of a free society, and I think we're running into some very serious concerns. We're running into serious concerns educationally
Yeah.
by really watching the dismantling of public education.
Yeah.
And public education, the cornerstone to a free society.
Yeah.
I can't believe it. I know how important public schools are. All of my children went to public schools, K through 12. One went to Plymouth State. One ended up at the University of New Hampshire. So they had the benefits of public education. My wife was the benefit of public education, and yet this budget that we put together allows for the dismantling of public education. by allowing you to withdraw money and choose an entity that will perform education for your child. Homeschooling, religious schooling,
Other private schooling.
other private schools. Education wasn't meant to be that way.
Yeah.
It wasn't meant to be that way. A free and appropriate public education creates equality,
Yeah.
makes us all equal.
Yeah, it does.
And,
It does.
and indeed, the little youngster who lives next door to us needs help. And he gets that help every day. Someone comes to his home and works with him. And that's part of his IEP. That's a wonderful thing. You know, that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
And we're moving away from those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And this budget moves us in that direction.
Through this voucher program.
Yes, through this voucher program.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been opposed to it, remain opposed to it. And in the second year of the biennium, the statewide property tax is reduced by $100 million, and that creates some other problems. It's worth 50 cents a thousand on your tax decrease, and it's for 1 year. God knows what's going to happen in the next biennium. But
Well, didn't I just read in the paper today that the National Education Association of New Hampshire, where my wife worked for many years as the communications person, is contemplating a lawsuit to
Yes.
challenge the
Yes.
constitutionality of this, which I think would be a meritorious lawsuit under our state constitution, which is more adamant about separation of church and state than the federal constitution.
I think we are going to have a lawsuit. I think there are going to be a number of lawsuits challenging what happened to this budget.
Yeah.
A number of lawsuits. And I believe that couple them with what's going on already in terms of education, the suit that's in place by the communities saying that the formula is not equal because
Yeah.
the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. This is my Robin Hood concept of how this budget was constructed. It was constructed by Robin Hood in reverse.
Robin in reverse.
We stole from the poor and gave to the rich, and
Yeah.
we're doing a very good job of that, and that's not a good thing. Listen, I'm not opposed to anybody working hard and achieving. I'm not opposed to gaining wealth. I think it's again one of the great parts of a free society
Yeah.
and a democracy. But indeed, you shouldn't do it legislatively. I don't think.
Lou, maybe
anyway.
you can explain, because I know this isn't the trailer bill. And by the way, one of the interesting things about this trailer bill, so-called, which is where they take the numbers in the budget and put them into words so that they work to carry out the policy
Yes.
that those numbers are intended to support. So the trailer bill is every bit as important as the budget itself.
Absolutely.
Absolutely as important. And in this trailer bill, let's see, there is money being taken out of the state property tax to try and achieve educational equality between property rich and property poor towns.
right.
An ongoing issue here since the original Claremont decision, I don't know how many years ago, more than 15 or 16 years, whatever it was.
yes.
And can you explain that? Because the governor and the defenders of this budget will tout that as a tax cut to benefit communities.
Well, that's what they're doing. They reduced the statewide property tax by $100 million. Okay, and as I said to you, that equates to a 50 cent per thousand reduction in property tax. But remember, the statewide property tax was never collected at the state level. It was collected and retained at the local level.
Right.
So all of the money, if you got more money from your statewide property tax, it was retained at the local level. Never went to the state because of the remember the donor situation?
Oh, yeah, that was a very fraught situation.
No donor town. So the statewide property tax is created, and supposedly that was set at a rate. I think it was $383 million was always the number. That number never changed, but the evaluation changed because it went up every year when you had a reevaluation. But it always remained, the number always remained the same. Now what's happened is that's been reduced by $100 million. And supposedly that's going to save everybody a lot of money. As I said,
Well, somebody's not going to get that $100 million that was otherwise there, right?
Right. And if you use it to reduce your statewide property tax, it will equate to 50 cents per thousand. 50 cents per thousand for 1 year. For 1 year.
Yeah.
Now, what's going to happen in the new budget?
Yeah.
Is that going to be carried forward? I don't think so. I don't think it's appropriate to be carried forward. Now, if there's a problem, 17.5 million was appropriated each year of the biennium, so that if a community lost money, they would be held harmless by this 17.5 million. That was another little trick that's in there to kind of balance things off. But in the long run, when you take these educational scholarships that are going to be withdrawn, that's going to reduce the money in the education trust, and that's going to go to the individual rather than to the community, and you'll see a disruption in the public system. There's another situation where if a public school ceases to use the building for public use, for public school use, the charter schools have right of first refusal to take that property.
Oh, I wasn't aware of that.
that's in the budget, and that isn't why we built the public schools. And indeed, if you close a public school, the public interest should be addressed. That should be used for the public good. And what's the public need at the present time? It's housing. It's housing. It's affordable housing, quote unquote, workforce housing, elderly housing. I know I did a tweet, and some person said to me, "Well, if we have all this money, why don't you get Section 8 going?" Well, Section 8's a federal program. We can't do anything with Section 8, but what we can do is we can provide more affordable housing. And there is $25 million in the budget to provide for money to the Housing Finance Authority in order to create more affordable housing. And there's $5 million that goes every year out of the real estate transfer tax to go to affordable housing. And we need more affordable housing, but you run into zoning problems when you talk about affordable housing. Now, I noticed that in Manchester, there's all kinds of talk about properties being renovated for housing downtown.
Right. Including a big one right across from the market
Right,
basket.
right across from
It was in
Market
the paper
Basket,
today, yeah.
I saw that, and then there's that other little one on the corner,
Yeah.
which will, I think 50 units or something of that nature. Well, we need affordable housing. Hey, get on the highway on Exit 4 on the west side, and you see an encampment. That encampment has been there and has been growing. I look at it every day.
Yeah.
I look at it every day. I see people taking their bikes and getting in and out of that area. I know it's not right. That's what I know. And yet people who are given the ability to get housing won't accept it.
Yeah.
And that's a problem. I think the mayor's done a great job of
Okay.
trying to provide housing.
Okay, we have a call.
Let's hear it.
Hello, caller. We're glad you're joining us on the Progress Report. We're happy to welcome you. Will you have a question or comment for either Lou or I?
Yeah, I want to chime in on the affordable housing. I want to explain to you something that's happened to me this past week. I am a 22-year city resident. I have 5 kids gone through the school system. I have a college student daughter now and a 9-year-old. My building was bought by a company from Massachusetts. It's a 3-family multiple. They're refurbishing it. The rent's going up 49%.
Wow.
And I've been told I have to get out.
Wow.
Has anybody ever thought about the hardworking individual families? Why is all this going towards drug-addicted homeless people? I am falling between the cracks because the people that bought this house are going to get guaranteed $1,800 a month per apartment, and I am out on the street. I have 2 daughters and a wife to take care of. I'm 56 years old. The rents in the city are crazy, and now you're getting all this COVID money, and it's all going to these people buying these triple-deckers and booting hard-working American families out of them. I'm very, very disheartened by this. I've been here for 15 years in this apartment, and this is what I get. This is the thank you for hard work, what I taught my children what hard work does. I am better off being a fentanyl addict or a homeless junkie to get anything from this city, and it's disgusting. And when you're throwing around $23 million, can somebody help out this hardworking man? Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Well, thanks for your call, and certainly,
Wow.
yeah, that's.
I don't know what to say to that gentleman. Maybe you
Well,
have some thoughts.
My thoughts are that's what's happening on the west side. I mean, in Ward 11, and to some extent in Ward 10 and Ward 12, outsiders are buying the properties and jacking up the rents, so that people can't afford to stay there. You know, we had a tradition in this city years and years and years ago where families owned the three-deckers, and they went down to the Sun, and the Sun took care of the facility and took care of the thing. That's all disappeared now. Outsiders see this as an opportunity, and that's something we have to be cognizant of, and we have to address. I mean, people can't.
Have we ever
can't
had any
sustain-
protection at the state level for people in this gentleman's position who were suddenly forced out because of a sale of a rental property? Has there ever been any effort to deal with that issue at the state level?
I don't believe so. I can't.
I don't know what
can't-
the solution would be, but
Right.
I'm sure his experience is not any way unique.
No.
You know, people buy these properties and then they see they have a better market opportunity with a different demographic to be the occupants, and people are out.
Well, you know what we did after talking about the Second World War, it was we created what I would call municipal housing. All right, and we have Maplewood Gardens on one side, and we have on the west side we have another group of houses up in Ward 11 and Ward 12, and that was supposed to be an answer. And that we have the Manchester Housing Authority, which takes care of that, and that was one attempt to provide housing. Now it's been partially successful, but some of those places have been run down, they've been repaired, they've been run down, they've been repaired, and some of them have received a bad name, as you know.
Yeah,
But it was an attempt, and then we had housing for the elderly. We built those high-rise buildings, and then when Jack Kemp became Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, he said, well, these should be open to all people, not just the elderly. So you had an integration of people, and that created some further problems, and those exist. And, it's a tough line to work on, because you don't want to have restricted housing in terms of rent control. People don't like that. They don't like that either. But there are places like New York City has rent control.
Yeah.
And it works in some areas. It doesn't work in others. But we've got to think. We've got to think along those lines, because taking advantage of people who've lived in a particular place for a long period of time, that's just not right. Yeah. Now, we have lived in the same house for 50 years. We built that house 50 years ago, and let me just tell you, we've improved it and so forth. But we worked hard. My wife and I worked hard, put our kids through school, and we're the beneficiaries of the American dream. I got to tell you that. Went to college and got jobs and worked hard. That's not the case for everybody, and that's one of the tragedies of life. But you got to keep working at it. But this guy deserves some help. I mean, he deserves something, because if he's got 5 children and he's been there for 15 years, he's obviously paid his rent religiously and kept up with things.
Where could he go for help? The Manchester Housing Authority? Is that where he should go?
Possible, or maybe try to go to first-time buyer. And work with the New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority to look for a home that's available. Home ownership has always been the desire. We bought our first home, Bob, in Manchester for $17,500.
Really?
On the west side of Manchester, $17,500. It's amazing, because it was a ranch house, but it's my father used to come to the ranch house, and it was sort of backed into a lot, so that it was long rather than long in a horizontal way. It was long in a vertical way. So you went in through the garage, and people used to comment about that. And we drive by the house every once in a while. We live in the same neighborhood today, by having moved to another house. And we look at it and we think about it. Hey, home ownership was a big deal. You wanted to
Yeah.
own your own home, and you tried to work.
I
work
wonder,
hard.
so much of the housing that's being built, and I'm thinking of a new complex being built right across from the Villa Augustina in Goffstown that's now underway, and this is most of this is for 55 and up.
Yep.
And I wonder about our policy implications of building all this housing for seniors. Very nice. I'm sure it'll be very nice for some seniors. But, what are we doing for people with families like the gentleman that just
Right.
called us? How are we helping them with housing? Are we overdoing it with these restricted housing to seniors? I don't know.
Well, I think you got to be careful. You have to be very careful because the restricted housing that you're talking about, sometimes they don't want children.
That's right.
So
Yeah,
I mean,
a society doesn't want children is not gonna
No.
not gonna have a glowing future.
right. It's not going to have.
It's not going to have a glowing future.
You know,
They
and-
say we don't want children because it costs money to educate them.
Right.
That's
It
pretty
costs
short-sighted.
money for the schools, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, and we have almost a zero birth rate,
yeah,
and
Yeah.
that's a very dangerous thing.
yeah.
It's a very dangerous thing.
God, even the Chinese have decided it's okay to have more than
More
one
than
child.
one, right.
now.
They've left-
they're now permitting 3. I told
Right.
my daughter-in-law who's Chinese. I said, "Hey, just notice that?" They have
the
two.
cap has been lifted. I wanted to just spend a couple of moments. We haven't got a lot of time left to
Right.
talk about the budget and
Yes.
to talk about what's happening. I just got a copy of the Focus, and the Focus is put out every month by the Department of Administrative Services, and it gives the position of the budget as far as revenues are concerned on a cash basis for the areas of the budget that are collected by revenue administration. Right? There are certain taxes that are collected by revenue administration. There are certain taxes that are collected by safety, and that's like the gas tax and the registration fees and so forth and so on. There are others that are collected by Fish and Game, that's the hunting licenses and so forth. So you have multiple places to get money. But in looking at the analysis this month, we have a surplus of $310 million for this year, and that's closing the books on the 30th of June, and looking at the cash basis of the revenues that we collect. So there was $300 million over plan. When you look at the anomalous situation, those are monies that were collected after the close of the budget, but because the federal government extended the time that you could pay your taxes, those monies have to be credited back to the previous fiscal year. That amounts to about $30 million. So when you take that, you still have a surplus of about $275 million. When you look at Senate Bill 3, which is the PPP, and that was the ability to get money from the federal government that paid wages and so forth.
payroll protection plan.
Protection plan. All right, that's going to be non-taxed based on Senate Bill 3. So that will amount to about $90 million, but that's going to be spread out over a period of years, I think 3 years. So when you take all of those deductions, you still have a significant surplus. What's happened is much of that surplus was spent in 21, so that wouldn't appear in the 22-23 budget. So that budget would not exceed the $13.5 billion that was in the governor's proposal, in the House proposal, and it turned out in the Senate proposal. So that's playing with the budget to some extent.
Yeah.
My complaint is, given the fact that we have weathered the pandemic, well, financially we
Yeah,
have
we certainly
at
have.
this point in time. Why are we reducing taxes?
Yeah.
And if you're going to, who should get a reduction? Shouldn't it be the people who need it the most? All right. So Sidney Rosenwald proposed a piece of legislation that would reduce the rooms and meals and give the money to the proprietors, the little store owners who get the 3% VIG for collecting it. Increase that to 5% for a year so that they could help restore the monies that they lost during the pandemic. That was voted down. And what happened is Governor reduced the rooms and meals by 0.5%. That has 3 negative effects. One positive effect. The positive effect is this. If you buy a meal, you probably save between 9 and 11 cents on the meal. The money that comes from that tax that goes back to the cities and towns is reduced by 0.5%. The amount of money saved or kept by the vendor is reduced because he gets 3% of 8.5 instead of 3% of 9. So you got negative there, and you got negative here, and you're saving a person 9 cents on a meal. Now, when a person usually calculates their tip, they usually calculate the tip. If you give it 20%, you double the cost, double the percentage. So if it's a $20 bill, you usually double it, so you're giving $4 for the tip. The tipper, the recipient, is going to lose out on that because of the reduction in the bill. The bill's going to reduce by 0.5%. So why do you do something like that?
Yeah.
When people in the communities depend on rooms and meals revenue, that again, and then instead of municipal aid, which we had in the budget last time at $20 million a year, we suspend revenue sharing. We suspend it.
Yeah.
So, and when we got plenty of money,
Yeah. Why would we do that?
why would we do it? It's amazing to me. We have more money available this biennium than I think we've ever had.
What is the reason for that? I mean, a lot of it is federal largesse, right?
Exactly.
A big chunk of it. And I guess a lot of it is soaring real estate values on the real estate
because of
transfers.
real estate transfer tax. But you got 1.25 billion under the COVID Act.
Yeah.
1.25 billion. We still have 25 million left that we haven't spent.
Yeah.
And that's got to be spent by December. We're getting 1 billion under the Recovery Act.
If that happens.
That's done. That's passed.
Oh, that's the one that's done?
That's passed.
Okay.
So we're getting 1 billion out of that. Take the 1.25 and the other billion. That's $2.25 billion
Yeah.
over and above what our revenues have produced. And at the same time, revenues are at $300 million above plan.
Yeah.
Now you talk about windfall.
This is a windfall.
This is a windfall. Is that
And
gonna,
are the plans to deal with this largesse, are they really well crafted to serve the interests of most citizens?
Well, I think some of them are. Sure, I mean, nothing is all bad, but you're not going to fund Planned Parenthood. You're going to destroy public education. You got a number of other situations. You're reducing the BPT. You're reducing the BET. You're getting rid of the interest and dividends tax. Which
Yeah, I
will
don't
have
understand that one at all.
So I mean, all of those things are happening at the same time, and what's happening at your local community?
Yeah.
Well, at this point,
Well,
we're hanging in.
it reminds me of what Napoleon once said about a marshal he fired because he wasn't lucky. I think Governor Sununu has been extremely lucky to be at the office at the time he was, to take advantage of all the coverage from his pandemic briefings and then have this largesse provided for the federal government to make the state look very flush.
Well, timing is everything in this life.
It certainly is.
And if the right place, the right time makes a tremendous difference in your ability to succeed. And we have a few minutes left. I'd like to talk with you about partisanship, because
That's where we came in.
Yeah, when the majority leader of the United States Senate said that he would do everything he could to not get the president reelected, and that's our famous senator from Kentucky, and when he put the kibosh on, even
He said that about President Obama
early
in his new administration.
early
My
in
number
his
one goal
administration.
was to make sure that Obama is a
doesn't
one-term
get-
president.
right.
That's the kind of leadership we're getting.
and then does not allow for a hearing on a Supreme Court justice.
Yeah.
I mean, that's outright partisanship. But
Well, I
that-
think the
that's-
worst example of that of them all was the refusal to support an independent commission to investigate the Capitol insurrection on January 6th.
Oh, absolutely.
We had a commission after 9/11. We had one after Pearl Harbor.
Right.
We had one after the assassination of John F. Kennedy.
Right.
All of those things. We had one on the race problem under the Kerner Commission. All of those commissions did yeoman work. And here is an attack on the very people
Right.
serving in office in that Capitol who now refuse to have an independent commission proceed to get to the bottom of that.
I think that's
I think that is the
unbelievable.
most disgraceful thing.
No
with-
question.
combined with the other ones you mentioned, I can just imagine. I mean, how could we be so partisan to let this happen? Does nobody care about does nobody have any values to serve the country upon their party and things like this? How can there be any partisan divide on not investigating a insurrection in our own capital with a serious threat and some loss of life?
Sure.
I mean,
Well,
I just don't get it.
But it's a perfect example of what Washington mentioned in his farewell address. This being allowed to happen, the manifestation of this, has become awful polarization.
Yeah.
And polarization to the point where you don't talk to your opponents. You have no association
Yep.
with your opponents, and I think that's
You look at where this comes from, and everybody's got their own theories. That back in the day, before we had jet travel, people stayed in Washington and they formed
Right.
They formed friendships and alliances because they were hanging out on the weekends. Now they're all home raising money.
Right.
You've got that.
Wow.
But I think the number one thing is the decision of the end of any. I think the loss of the fairness doctrine is a big factor in this. The fairness doctrine was an
Yes,
a federal
I think
communication
right.
requirement that people that use the public airwaves, and they are the public airwaves to make tons of money, like TV channels and radio too, they have an obligation to serve the public interest, and embedded in that is the idea that if you're going to take a political point of view on something, you have to offer up to a responsible spokesman for an opposing point of view some opportunity to rebut that.
right.
Now, when I was fighting the Seabrook Dragon, which I like to remind people, we did stop
Right.
one of the two reactors, and Joe McQuaid was opining on that today. It was a great thing.
Right.
He forgot about that. But I would go down to Channel 9 all the time, and I'd say, I've heard what
Right.
your people said about this. I would like some time. And they would give it to me.
Yeah.
And I really used that. That's gone.
Yes, that's history.
And now we have everybody in there, as the expression goes, their own silos. If you're a
Right.
Trump supporter, you're on to Fox News, or maybe even more extreme things like One America Network. And if you're on the other side, you're probably watching MSNBC. And there's no Walter Cronkite, the most
Right.
trusted man in America, to say,
Right.
well, we can agree on what he tells us is probably
Right.
pretty close to the truth.
Right.
The
Right.
truth has become, well,
The
the Bible says you know the truth will set you free.
Free,
So
right,
one of my
right.
favorite, but we don't agree on what the truth is anymore.
Well-
What George Orwell thought it was going to happen to our language has happened. Language is now, it's Humpty Dumpty said, a word means what I want it to mean, nothing more, nothing less. Well, that's where we are. Everybody's word mean their own things to themselves, and they don't pay any attention to the rest of it. I just think it's I'm really concerned about the future of our country. I really am.
Well,
I think
we
our
have to
democracy
be.
hangs by a thread.
Well, we have to be concerned. We have to be concerned because most democracies last for what 390 years, and we're 350 years old. It's getting close.
It's getting close. It's getting close.
It's getting close, and what
Yeah,
we see.
it really is.
And I don't want to end on a tragic note, but the number of shootings that are taking place around this country, the city of Chicago, the city of Boston,
New York.
New York.
Didn't the governor of New York just declare an emergency for gun violence?
Oh, it's terrible.
Yeah.
It's terrible. And look at what happened in Haiti.
Yeah.
The president of Haiti was assassinated
Yeah.
in his home.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
And as long as we continue to believe that the answer to gun violence is more guns, I don't see us going anywhere but spiraling into ever more
Right.
terrible territory than we're in, which is pretty dreadful.
It is.
Pretty dreadful. Yeah.
Well, we need a bright shining light. And
We need a
hope
bright
that-
shining light.
And we will have one. And let's hope it's Joe Biden.
And it's Joe Biden. You were an
Right,
early
right.
and strong supporter of
Yeah.
Joe's.
And
I think Joe's off to a great start.
I think he's done good work. He's
It's
done very
amazing
good
the number of
work.
people that think that Trump is somehow going to be returned to office,
Wow.
in a month.
Yeah, well-
I just unbelievable.
I think
And
that
the
is
number of people
unbelievable.
that refuse to accept the results of an election that was fair and without any significant systemic fraud whatsoever, but they refuse to accept it. led by the former president himself. I mean, it's just alarming. I think our democracy has never been more fragile and more in danger. And as the late Pogo said, you know, we have met the enemy, and he is us.
Well,
That's what we're seeing.
well, I
You know,
think
no
that's
foreign
right.
enemy,
Right.
whether it was
That's
Hitler or Stalin or the folly of Vietnam or the Iraq War. None of those things threatened our democracy like we are threatening it ourselves with the partisan division in this country. George foresaw it all, folks. George Washington,
Right.
our grandest founding father of them all.
So let's start reading the farewell address.
Start reading the farewell address
Yes,
again.
right.
He had lessons that resonate and
Right,
should resonate
right,
with us today.
right, for
But I
sure.
want to end up on a high note, too. I think one of the nice things I found about when I got back from my midnight train ride from Georgia was that the New Hampshire Supreme Court unanimously struck down at least one voter
Yes.
suppression effort
Yes.
enacted by the great and general court.
Yes.
And I imagine you smiled as broadly
Yes.
as I did when you read about that.
I think
A
it was
unanimous decision.
Yeah, it was a great decision.
And it can't go to the Supreme Court, which is not looking so great in the U.S. Supreme Court, because it was decided on the state constitution.
Right.
There's no federal jurisdiction here.
Right.
That decision is it. But they will be back, folks. They will be back with more voter suppression efforts, not just in Georgia and Arizona and Texas and
But
places
everywhere.
like that, but here in New Hampshire as well. So think about that and enjoy this beautiful, beautiful July evening. And I'll look to be back with you with Mike Farley next week, and I think we will undoubtedly have a guest next week. But it's been great to have you with me, Lou. It's
Thank you.
terrific
Oh,
because you
Bob,
have so
thank
much
you.
knowledge
Well, listen,
and
it's great to be
insights,
with
and it's absolutely terrific. And I want to thank, we had two, I think, really fine callers that advanced the show.
Yeah, thank
we
you.
really welcome our callers, so I hope more of you will join in, and those two gentlemen, welcome back anytime. We appreciate the insights that they brought. These personal stories really do count, you know.
They're very
They,
meaningful.
you know, it's, well, what Lou and I think we can both agree we've learned, statistics don't change people. You know, reasonable declamations don't change people. Stories change people.
Yes.
Stories of people's own struggles and their own lives and their need to, you know, have the government help them in certain areas, which the government should help them in. The government can't do everything, but the government can help people. Lou and I both agree on that, and we are not going to favor those people that say dismantle the government. The government is the problem, not the solution, which was the key line from a certain inaugural address in 1980 by a certain guy from California.
Well, I think let's end with John F. Kennedy's famous line: "Ask not what your government can do for you,
What your country can do for you, what you can do for your
ask
country.
what you can
That's
do
a
for your
good, that's a
country."
good point to end.
And I was I just pulled out his Profiles in Courage.
Yeah.
And I read the new introduction. This is a redo. I read Robert Kennedy's introduction.
Yeah.
To it, and you know.
You know, some of his profiles don't look so good right now. Like the guy that saved Andrew Johnson's presidency
Right.
by one vote in the Senate in the first impeachment trial. History's kind of revised that verdict, I think. But in any event, John F. Kennedy was an inspirational leader.
He was. He
And
had,
it meant a lot to people like Lou and I, who were, you
sure
know,
did.
young and idealistic and really wanted to believe that he was the answer.
he was going to make the difference.
He was going to make the difference, and I think he did.
Yeah, I think he did too.
Okay.
Well, we can't forget him.
We can't forget him,
He is
no.
forever young.
He's forever young, that's right.
Forever young. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Good night.
everybody. We'll be
Stay
back. I'll be
healthy.
back next week. Enjoy the rest of this lovely week. Bye.